The filming of this documentary was done in 2 segments. The main shoot was filmed in January 2014, involving 8 people. Most filming was done by Joe Shemish, well-known wilderness and wildlife photographer and winner of the prestigious Gold Tripod Award for cinematography. Joe was assisted by Sarah Abbott. Other assistants were Jack and Jude Binder. Jack and Jude are world adventurers in their own right who have produced books and DVDs of their travels, which can be seen on their website, jackandjude.com. Stephen Morrison, better known as Deke, worked with his father in the aquaculture business and is an expert boat handler and cook. Gary Kerr is a fisherman by profession and historian and documentary maker by inclination. Franz Doherty is an actor and playwright who has been associated with Strahan and the Piners story since 1993. Ron Morrison worked in the bush as a young man, then made a successful switch to aquaculture. Now retired, he has a passion for the old days and the old ways and never happier than when he is in the bush.
Oh, I love the bush. It's a great place. Yeah, can't get a better place to work, you know. There was never a great deal of money in the bush, and I guess that's why, you know, a lot of people got out of the industry as well. It was just, yeah, no one made a fortune out of the timber industry that worked in the Gordon River. It was just a means of getting an income, you know, with a lot of hard work. But you know, obviously a lot of people worked here for the survival, and a lot of people worked here for both the survival as well as the love of the bush. And you know, I just like the bush and the rivers, and it's just beautiful country. Oh, and I just like to, it's just good that other people can probably understand a little bit about what it is that's in these areas before it's all gone, you know, before people that have sort of worked in the area just disappear, and that cultural sort of history or heritage is lost.
So I've been an actor and playwright for quite a few years now. In 1993 I found myself without any work. I talked to actor and playwright Richard Davey, and he had a project on. He wanted to bring a play to Strahan in 1994, establish it, West Coast story, and he didn't have anyone to act with him. So I got on board the project. Richard and I brought the play over in 1994, and that was The Ship That Never Was, which is now Australia's longest running play. In the first year, we'd do the play in the afternoon, and where we did the play was right next to the Morrison sawmill. So after the play, what I'd do is I'd go next door and have a beer with old Terry Jones, who was living in the mill. And we'd chat away, and he was an old piner. And he'd get out his albums and show me the photos, and I just was fascinated with the story of the Piners. It just immediately consumed me. I thought it was fantastic. Amazing world, and what these guys did was extraordinary. And I was just consumed by it. And I said to Richard Davey, I said, I'm going to write a feature film. I'm going to write a feature film about these guys. And he said, no, write a play. And he said, I'll get you some money. I said, righto, I'll write the play. So I wrote the play, and that was The Piners, Bastards of the Boats and Bush. We gave it to the old hands around town to make sure that it got the tick of approval, and they thought it was fine. So we did the play, and we did it in the Morrison sawmill, and I'll never forget it. All the kids were down the front. Everyone was just standing around. The keg was there. The dogs were fighting, and we did this play, and it just went off. It was fantastic experience. And I think, from memory, that was the first time that I met Ronnie Morrison. And that was 20 years ago. And the play went on. There was the festival, the Piners Festival. I always wanted to catch up with that story again. And I did a radio documentary on one of the old Piners, Reg Morrison. And I did an hour-length radio documentary for ABC. And I tried to get a documentary up for television, but it's very, very difficult, as you know, Gary. And I thought, that's it. I'll let the story go. And then I got a call from you, Gary. And like, we've got history. We met through the Piners play, you doing your book and the television documentary on the Piners. And we worked together on ideas and things like that. And then you gave me the opportunity to work on the Cape Horners. And I guess that's where we worked out that we could work together and work well together. And so we did that project, and then I thought that was it. And then you gave me the call. Do you want to come up the Gordon River? And well, I wasn't going to say no. It was just like, here's an opportunity of a lifetime to go up with Ronnie Morrison, one of the last fellas to cut a tree down up in the Denison River. And also working with Joe, seeing the footage that he's creating, it's just mind-blowing. And I knew taking Ronnie up, getting the photos from Joe, and you putting it all together, it was just a project that someone couldn't say no to do. So yeah, and I think it's a really good thing to do for the Piners story, to make sure that it's still getting out there and being told by one of the last fellas up there, guiding us through the journey of telling this story. It's just fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I'm a fisherman, but I've had a long interest in history ever since I was young. Had an interest in history. And I remember seeing a big country program back in the 70s with Reg Morrison and Doyle. They brought them up the river here in the JLEM. And I was just fascinated with the place. And I'd also read Patsy Adams Smith's books, you know, Tiger Country. She had a chapter on the Piners, the Abels. There's another book called Trampled Wilderness, had a section on the Piners. And this sort of tweaked my curiosity, I suppose. I had an interest in Huon Pine, the special qualities of Huon Pine. I even had a cray boat built out of Huon Pine from Morrison's Mill back in the early 80s. We planked it with 2-inch Huon Pine, which Snowy cut for us, or Doyle. But it wasn't till the early 90s when I had another boat, Saloon, Strahan, sheltering westerly gales in the winter time. And I met Terry Jones at the mill, night watchman at the mill again. And he told me about what they used to do up the river as a young fella in the 1930s. And I was just fascinated they could work horses in this rainforest. And they'd have to supply the camps with punts. And how they'd have these big fires in the camps, and they'd hang their flannels around and dry them by the fire. And they'd be nearly hard next day, but they'd shed the water. And that fired my imagination. Then I was in New Zealand, picked up a book that was all about the kauri pine of northern New Zealand. I thought, gee, wouldn't that be great to do on the Huon Pine, the Piners story. But I thought it was a pretty big project. I'd already done a couple of other books on boats and fishing boats and ketches and so on. But it wasn't until I met Harry McDermott in Strahan. He was he had an interest in history, and he was a descendant of the Dohertys, descendant of old Thomas Doherty, the convict piner of Port Davey, through his mother's line. I said to Harry, would you be interested in collaborating in a book on the Piners? Oh yes, he'd be in that. So we did. We collaborated in that and produced the book, The Huon Pine Story. And it was a joy to do, meeting all those old characters, Reg and Bobby Crane and Roy Nielsen, Ron Penny, all those blokes. It was a pleasure to be involved. And I know while I had been up the river in '79 in my own boat and afterwards in Saloona and so on, it wasn't until I come up the river with Denny Hamill that I really got to know the place. He showed me where the old campsites and that were, because he'd worked with Reg and it had been handed down to Denny, and he handed it on to me, showed me a lot of the sites. So we produced the book, and I thought, what a great thing it would be to capture these old fellas on screen, you know, a documentary film. So that's when I instigated that half-hour version of the oldest living Tasmanian, the Huon Pine, that went to ABC TV. It's an hour on DVD. But we did a lot of interviews in that weren't used. There was a lot of material left on the cutting room floor which I thought was a shame to go to waste. And I got to know Ronnie Morrison, and I got to realise his passion for the river and for the history. And I said a couple of years ago, I said to Ron, what about we do something together? And he was quite agreeable. And of course I'd met you, Franz, through the Huon Pine and through the last Cape Horners. And so I thought, you're just the boy to come up the river with Ronnie, like the two men in a tinny, and show the viewers the beauty of the place and the history of the place, and bounce off each other, which I think has worked very well. And I was looking forward to weaving some of the old interviews we hadn't used before, weaving them into the story. And hopefully that works okay. So what are your first memories of working in the bush, Ronnie?
Oh, first memories, I suppose I was only a bit over 3.5 really. Dad used to take me to the bush just for company, I suppose, in those days. And we had a saw bench there and a log hauler, and in those days you used to fall the trees with a crosscut saw and axe, celery, and pull them out to the landing with a log hauler. And then he'd mill some of it. He had a saw bench there, used to mill a lot of it on his own.
And this was King Billy, was it?
No, this was celery top pine, yeah. Yeah, Alan and I as kids, we used to spend a lot of time in the bush, right up to when we started primary school, I suppose, when we were about 5. Used to stay in the camp with him sometimes, weekends. And
You had a camp out there, did you?
Had a camp, yeah. Yeah, not much left of the camp now. But, I remember when I was about 4, I think I was, he was rolling a log on the landing, and it had a bend in it, and the log kept rolling, and I was playing around with a block, a corner block for the log hauler near the skids, and the log kept rolling, and it rolled onto my leg, crushed my leg, and broke my leg, and so I had about 6 weeks in plaster. So I just always remember that, he had me sitting up on the saw bench and a cup of black tea, waiting for hours for a car to come along. It was a gravel road in those days, not much traffic around. Oh, when I was really young, yeah, there weren't many horses left then around Strahan. They're sort of all starting to retire, the horses. But I always remember him sitting me up on top of this great giant draft horse. It seemed a giant anyway, but I suppose when you're 3 or 4 years old, everything's big, isn't it? Yeah, when I left school, Gary, I worked with Dad in the bush as well, and worked for Reg on the Denniston Star. So I shared a bit. I used to work a little bit in the summertime with Reg, and then we'd go to Hobart. But during the summer months here, after I knocked off work, so at past 3, 4 o'clock, it doesn't get dark till 9 or 10 o'clock, so we'd go away to the bush as well and work till dark on the celery top pine. Yeah, I was probably about 21 or 22 then, Gary, but yeah, Dad said, he said, we'll get organised and I'll take you around and show you some of the places where we used to cut the pine, the Huon Pine, up to Gordon, up to Sprent and up to the Dartmoor camp and places like that, and some of the old camps, the Grindings Landing and the Lawn and all those sort of places. So yeah, we went away, it was about this time of the year, about May. It was reasonable sort of weather, but short days. No, that was real good. So we found a lot of what they abandoned where they worked in the 30s, late 30s, and where he started working as a young fellow with his father as well, back at the Sandstone a little bit earlier. In the early 30s, they were only very young then themselves, late teens, early 20s. We walked up the Sprent River just to have a look at the big log jam that he'd told me about for years that they left when they all got injured, 1938. Ron and Reg and Keith were all injured, and that's when they sold the job out to R.J. Howard from Zan. But though he said he knew the logs were still there because obviously had been worked, working the timber industry thereafter once they recovered from their injuries, but not in that particular area. And so we walked up the Sprent, and there were about 80 Huon pine logs there, nice big Huon pine logs. And then we kept walking up this real rough river. I'd never been there before. He said, no, it's not far. He said, up in another couple of miles up the river, and it's rough. He was, late 60s then himself. But, he said, we've got to get up to the deep hole where the log chute is. Anyway, it's because it's May, it's getting late in the day, and I'm thinking, geez, I hope he knows where he's going. It's starting to get dark. And we get to the deep hole of the Sprent, and he said, we just got to walk around here on the western side of the deep hole, and then we'll be at the chute and up straight up. Well, you could just make out the start of the chute. That's how the light was. It was getting really dark because it's very steep in the Sprent. It's like that. No light much. So here we are. I'm in front of Dad, climbing up this log chute, and he's got hold of me from time to time. I'm giving him a bit of a pull up because it was like that, climbing up the log chute. Anyway, about an hour or so later, we gets to the top. And I said to him, how the hell did you know where it was? He said, it's just one of those things, isn't it? He said, if you've been there, you've done it, you just always remember it. He said, you might be a bit rusty. And anyway, he said, we'll get along here another 40 or 50 yards, he said, and we'll come to this long bridge. Got a bit of a curve in it. So anyway, the moon was out. It wasn't raining, luckily, but the moon was out, and we could follow the track, and then I could see the light coming down through the trees onto this bridge. It's 35, 40 years since he was there, and here we are walking around in the dark, and he's describing it to me as like he was there the day before yesterday. So he said, well, we cross over this long bridge, which got a bit of a curve in it, and we'll go another sort of 100 yards, and we'll cross the small bridge over Morrison's Creek. And I'd heard Reg talk about the same bridge as well. Doyle was out there. Reg always used to say Doyle used to set the jellies in the creek, because the creek was always icy cold, the water. But anyway, we get to this bridge, and it was all Huon pine as well. Like, we had the axe with us, box of matches so you could get a fire going with a billy and a little bit of food. And so we'd walked pretty much all day, and this was probably about 8 o'clock at night. We finally get to the last bridge over Morrison's Creek just before the Dartmoor camp. And anyway, I think Dad he had enough walking, so I said, we'll get a fire going here, up there, right at the end of the bridge, between the bridge and the camp. So we got a fire going aboard the billy, and we ended up sleeping. We cut a few ferns and laid them on the ground and kept the fire going. Cut a little bit of decking off the side of the bridge as well, just to get the fire going, because that was all Huon pine, get the sticks there, and we cut a bit of manuka and kept the fire going all night. So we didn't plan to stay all night there. We're going to come back to the boat and then go the next day, but because we were late getting away from the island where the logs were, and walking up the river took a bit longer for Dad than what he thought. So we basically run out of daylight. Anyway, that was a good night. We woke up early, of course, daylight next morning. The bed wasn't real soft. And I said, how far is the camp? And he said, look, it's only about 60 or 70 yards from here. And anyway, sure enough, we're walking down the track, and on the left-hand side, there's the camp. Everything's still there, the shelves are still in the camp, and you could hear the river. You could nearly see the river at all. He said, I can't believe it. He said, when we were here, there wasn't a tree here, and there were gums like that growing up everywhere since they'd worked there. And anyway, we had a look in the camp, and there was a row of tins of bully beef, a camp pie. And I remember Reg and Billy had gone out there a couple of years earlier, about 2 years earlier. They'd gone out there because Reg always reckoned there was gold in the log chute, because they picked a a log up at the mill. It had a big rock in the end of it where it hit another rock either in the chute or coming down the sprint, and had gold in the rock. But anyway, they went out there looking for this gold in the log chute, only about 2 years before we were there. And of course, Reg being Reg, he didn't really eat much. He didn't think everyone else needed to eat as well. So Billy and Reg run out of food. And then so they opened this bully beef, which had been there since 1938. This is 1970, so it's 40 years. The tins, you can still read the labels, only just, so rusty tins. We didn't eat any, but yeah, Reg opened them up with an axe and ate it. Put it on the bread and ate that. Yes, a bottle of tomato sauce was still there, and plates and stuff like that, yeah. All the old stuff, the bunks were still there. Old pole bunks, with a chaff bag, then taken out the end, 2 of those together to make a bunk. And then he said, remember that photo I showed you before we left Strahan? With the 3 boys cutting that big Huon pine down. There was Doyle and Reg and myself and Ron. And Reg took the photo. That's Keith there on the right, that's my father, and Ron in the middle, and Doyle on the left. And Doyle he'd been away and not long come back to work on the Dartmoor job. He'd gone to Victoria. He'd been over there for some time on a farm with one of the arties. And I said, yeah, I remember. He said, well, that log, he said, it's just over here, about 30 yards away from the camp. And I said, how come you left it there? He said, oh, look, he said, that's when we all got injured. And, that log or tree was close to the camp, so you don't cut all the trees close to the camp. You leave those for a rainy day. Wet day, you might go and do it, have a short day. So you always get the stuff that's furthest away on a job. You get the easy stuff when it suits you. So anyway, that was an easy one, but the log was still laying there, and it's still there now.
Yes. My association with Joe Shemish, the cameraman, it goes back to the Huon Piners story, the book. He did a lot of the still photos for that. I got to know Joe through Denny because they were mates, and Denny had brought Joe up the river like he'd brought me up the river. And so Joe and I were involved together in The Oldest Living Tasmanian, the Huon Pine DVD doco, and then the Cape Horners, like I was with you. And here we are doing another one. I reckon we've got a pretty good team together. Hopefully it'll be well received.
I'll tell you how I ended up here, actually. Yeah, because that's a story. Yeah. Quite intriguing, actually. When I was about 15 years old, I was living in Sydney, and I watched one of those Sunday program shows. They used to do half an hour or 40 minutes on a certain place somewhere around Australia. It was George Negus, I still remember, and on this particular morning, I never used to watch the show, but on this particular morning, George Negus was brought up the Gordon River in a float plane, and then hopped in a dinghy and taken up to an ancient Huon pine that at the time they said not many people had ever seen. And they really captured my imagination, it really did. I was just enthralled that there could be such a place in existence, really. And I thought, one of these days I'm going to go there, and I might not get to see that Huon pine, but I'm at least going to go to the Gordon River. And some 15 years later, I did actually come to the Gordon River and brought my own little tinny and actually lived up here for 11 months. I camped up and down the river. And so it was quite amazing when only 2 or 3 years later, through Denny Hamill, I met Gary Kerr, and he asked me to take some photos for his Huon Pine book. And the Huon Pine book went really well, did really well, sold, and Gary rings up one day and he says, I want to do a doco on the Piners. And all those years later, nearly 20 years after seeing that program, here I was going up to see that same Huon Pine, and we actually filmed it in the documentary. Now, that's a story that'll live with me for the rest of my life. I mean, talk about serendipity. just amazing. In 2004, Gary and I went to Finland to actually do some filming on the Cape Horners doco that Gary did, and met some marvellous people over there. Just marvellous story, really. An absolute privilege to have been involved in that as well. And just hear, in a similar vein, hear those people's stories of what it was like working on the square rigger ships and the hardships, very much the same as the Piners and their stories of what it was like working on the Gordon. My overall passion is the wilderness, and spending time in these sort of places is just a huge honour. It's a huge bonus to have managed to leave the city, which is obviously a very different lifestyle, and to come to a place like this. It just basically astounded me, and I just feel very privileged to have lived a life now for the last, it's my 20th anniversary in Tasmania, to have lived a life over the last 20 or 30 years just being out in nature and seeing the marvellous things that take place, seeing the wildlife, seeing the bush, and of course meeting some of the wonderful people along the way. In 2013 I was really honoured by receiving a Gold Tripod Award from the Australian Cinematographers Society, and that's a big milestone, really. It's a personal milestone in that it kind of is a reward for all the time that I've spent out in the bush, and pretty hard times, not as hard as the Piners, but pretty hard times, pretty uncomfortable times. It's not for everyone. Being a nature-based cinematographer is definitely not something that a lot of people would be able to handle, really. But yeah, that was a wonderful reward and wonderful recognition, not just of my work, but really the elements that I point my camera at. It's just good. It's justification for having spent most of my life out here and doing what I do.